Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth Gilligan from the Coolidge Corner Theatre. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's virtual discussion of In Silico. It's Noah Hutton's extraordinary new documentary. We've opened it at coolidge.org at our virtual screening room today. It's going to be opening at theaters nationwide tomorrow, so be sure to check it out. Anytime you're renting a film through the Coolidge or your local art house, you are supporting us during what has been a incredibly long journey now, 14 months of being closed. But we're very happy to announce that we're going to be reopening in the middle of May 13th. And I know many of our fellow art houses are also on the road back. So we're just incredibly grateful for all the support during this time. And we're thrilled to be able to host virtual events like this so we can stay connected with all of you. Just a few quick thank yous to the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. They not only supported the film, but they also support Science on Screen at the Coolidge. It's a series we started in 2005, but with the help of Sloan, we've been able to bring it to 96 different cinemas nationwide. So theaters in Juneau, Alaska, in Nashville, in Little Rock, New York City, all over the place are working to present Science on Screen programs and educate their community through film. So we're so grateful to them, to Dorn Weber, the VP of programs there, also to our local sponsors, Ruben Anders Scientific, Ellen Hoffman, and Ken Loveday. And thank you also to Mia Bruno for putting together tonight's event, and to former Coolidge Award honoree Werner Herzog for being here. And without further ado, I just want to introduce our moderator, Molly Webster from Radiolab. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat, but otherwise they'll get going. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Beth. So as Beth said, I'm Molly Webster. I'm a writer and science journalist at Radiolab. And tonight we're going to have a very cool, quick, fast, who knows what will happen conversation over the premiere of this awesome documentary by Noah Hutton. For those of you who haven't seen it, the film is called In Silico, and it's really about a scientist who's trying to digitally recreate the human brain. And so that means trying to capture all of the trillions of neurons and connections and memories and thoughts and electrical pulses that go through the brain and put them into a computer. And needless to say, it was a 13-year project and it got very complicated along the way. You don't have to have seen the film to follow along with tonight's discussion. We're just going to use the film as a jumping off point to talk about different kind of themes and storytelling techniques. And so two of the ideas, just a framework that I'm most excited about diving into, is one about capturing the invisibleness of science and trying to put that in front of the public. And then also thinking about the role that ego has to play when we decide what science stories to tell and how to tell them. Our guests have other ideas as well. And so to introduce them, there's you guys can give little waves as your name gets called. We have Noah Hutton, who is In Silico's writer and director. He also is the writer and director of the science feature film Lapsus and the award-winning documentary Deep Time and Crude Independence. And of course, Noah's sparring partner this evening is Werner Herzog, legend of cinema, written, produced, and directed more than 75 films. Thanks for the wave, guys. Also the founding advisor for Sandbox Films, who helped make In Silico. So as Beth said, drop your questions in the comment box. And I just want to jump in. So Noah, I'm going to start with you. And this is a movie about the brain, about scientists struggling to conceptualize the brain. And I'm wondering why you decided to try to explain and capture one of the most complicated scientific ideas in the world, which is like consciousness and just how the brain itself works.
Well, yeah, why even do that? It just seems kind of crazy. Well, I studied neuroscience as an undergraduate. I was into it from a very intellectual perspective, but I started to make films and I thought, like, how could you tell a story about something, as you say, that's so opaque? Not only the way it's studied sometimes, but the way it's talked about, the knowledge we have about ourselves is such at the early stages when you get into it with scientists. So the part of the what drew me to it was the sort of madness of trying to even study the brain. I just thought, here's someone who wanted to take a 10-year timeline to say they could simulate an entire brain when we're so early in our understanding of it. What kind of person sort of sets out on that journey. So I was interested in it from a human level of the kind of mentality that's needed to begin a 10-year journey to understand the entire human brain. I thought that was an intriguing position to begin a project at. And then I thought visually, the way they were starting to show the inside of the brain, the fly-throughs that they were using, cinematically, I thought that those were new kinds of visuals I hadn't seen before. So I thought there was a potential, maybe aesthetically there, that would be interesting.
Do you have a science background for the viewers that don't know you?
Just this undergraduate period at a liberal arts school taking neuroscience classes, but I don't consider myself a scientist at all. I haven't actually done any bench science. And I think that's a somewhat important distinction, but I did get very much in the weeds. I took, what would accumulate to the amount I spent on my art history major worth of classes. So I felt like—
Oh, you did take classes.
Oh yeah, I took 9 classes at Wesleyan University in neuroscience, and I went deep, and I got in there. And then I ran a blog for a long time called The Beautiful Brain, which was about art and neuroscience. And so I was doing a podcast. I was really out there talking to scientists, but this film became a way to accumulate all of that interest in one project that, started in one way and took a few turns along the way.
Yeah. Werner, one of your methods of communication is taking really, really abstract ideas, and it can be anything from hubris to the human experience or emotional intelligence, and trying to get those to viewers. What's your approach? Are you like Noah? You take classes?
I think we have one thing in common, Noah and I. Since long time, I write and narrate my own commentaries, and Noah is one of the growing number of young filmmakers who is doing his own narration in his own voice. And Noah is also visible. And what is very interesting it becomes such a quest, a personal quest. Yes. And we notice that Noah at the beginning of the film, very early, and I say it on purpose, he's kind of seduced by a TED talk that he witnesses. And the scientist from Switzerland, Henry Markram, explains his project that he would simulating the entire brain on a supercomputer in 10 years. So these TED Talks have a downside. Most of them are presentations that have to be sexy. Scientists, it really has to be sexy. And Noah was immediately caught fire. And of course, that's the most interesting, and I've never seen a film like this. You come into a film with an aim, with a goal, with a conviction. And in the course of the film, and we see it bit by bit, the conviction starts to be doubted. It then unravels, and there's a change of course, a change of conviction, and that's totally unusual. I've never seen that in a film. And Noah, you should explain a little bit, because you are the one who went through 10 years of tribulations.
I like that.
Travails and tribulations.
Noah, do you maybe just to frame for the viewers, you ended up narrating this film, as Werner said. I don't think that was your original intent. So I'm wondering, and you, in a sense, become a big character in the film. And so I'm wondering at what point you realized you were going to be in it. At what point you realized maybe even you had to step into it, or maybe artistically you wanted to?
Yeah, I think I had a great hope that for a long time on this project, I had a great hope that the subjects of the film would carry it, perhaps the music would carry it. I'm a huge fan of films like, for example, Werner, your film Lessons of Darkness, which you do add a text to, but very much the music in many of your films give a voice to the images, almost as if it's another character. So I was hoping in a way that I might be able to do that part of it without having to add my own voice. But of course, what happened was I realized that because it was such a long journey, and I had taken this one initial awe and wonder approach at sort of being seduced by this TED talk, as Werner's talking about, and then had a couple turns along the way and realized, that this project was perhaps a little oversold, or I had bought the hype in a way in the beginning, and that now I kept hearing this 10-year timeline was being re-extended throughout my time documenting the project. So I wondered if I was sort of the only one who's holding to account that initial 10 years. So as that sort of stuff started to happen, and then the characters in the film itself were perhaps a little less reliable, or I realized that I had to kind of, add a layer of text to the film. And that happened closer to the editing process. And I stepped in to write that and also to show myself in the film, which I didn't plan to do either. I had set up some GoPros and other little cameras during interviews and stuff as the filming went along, not really intending to show myself, but it was almost an accident that footage became useful in a different way in post-production.
Did you wonder, like, there's a couple of things you can do with science storytelling, right? Which is you could say, okay, this project is falling apart in a way that I didn't imagine it to fall apart, so I will just show it falling apart. What made you decide to actually show yourself in the moment watching it fall apart, as opposed to somehow edit it in such a way that just the audience could see the falling apart on their own without your guidance actually on screen?
Yeah, I think honestly the reason why is because I started to feel like the kind of perfect simulation that was trying to be built of the brain was far from what I experience as a human, the kind of like messiness of real life. And there was this disconnect that was opening up over the decade between like the perfection of the perfect algorithm to capture consciousness in the mind that was the sort of the end goal of this whole attempt, and the sort of foibles and constant failure and re-picking yourself up and trying againness of science. There was some sort of disconnect there, and I thought that I needed to embody that by showing my own film changing and my own kind of experiment, trying one thing, failing to live up to my own initial hype. I thought I could make a film in the end where they turn on a switch and there's a simulated brain. And like, that was my own science fiction idea of where this film was going to go. And I realized at a certain point it wasn't going there. So I thought I had to embody that and show that process unraveling, and then the film heading towards something else to capture the messiness.
Yeah. It's interesting, Werner, you are, there you go.
Noah, do you think that a computer and the human brain will ever correspond to each other? That was an original belief, apparently.
Yeah, I came, in the course of making this film, I came to be very skeptical that would ever happen, mostly because of what I'm talking about. And it's one scientist said something to me along the way that stuck with me and kind of had shaped my thinking as I went along. I was pressing at this idea of variability and the kind of chaos at every level of biology, like the mutations in DNA that are unpredictable that got us here, all of these sort of like little, we could call them errors or mistakes. And I asked one scientist, how would you ever, in programming a computer to replicate this, how would you ever know what the right kind of variability is? You're trying to program something that captures all of this variability. And she said, the right kind of variability, we can never know what the right kind of variability is. And that was the first time I heard someone say, we don't know if we could ever get there. I had been given a lot of salesmanship sort of up until that point. And so I came to really see this as maybe an important line in the sand between the human and the machine. The unpredictability of biology might be something essentially different that because it's unpredictable, couldn't be perfectly captured.
Right. Werner.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just, you ask another question, but I'll just spit my question out and you can field it when you want, which is you are often a narrator of your film. Noah and I were talking about this in preparation for this conversation, and we were both curious, at what point do you as a filmmaker think the chaos is useful versus when the chaos is distracting, and you have to throw it out. Like, as the science is changing in real time, as nature is changing in real time, when is that useful and when do you discard it?
Oh, there's never a thought about those things. I just follow the flow. There's if in the footage and I realize, oh, this cannot be understood, I have to say something, or I have to say, now the film is flowing along and I have to say something truly wild that really shakes the audience up to, it's not my voice. I mean, I have a terrible accent and people kind of make fun of it. But,
I think people would debate
it's totally legitimate. No, it's legitimate. I do invite satire, and that's fine. But I would articulate things that you would not hear like that normally, and that all of a sudden raises the attention of an audience. And Noah does it by revealing bit by bit that he's puzzled, that he starts to have doubts, he starts to reverse course, and he tells us so. He lets us know, and it's a very wonderful thing. And of course, what we have seen and what he sees, that the scientists with 1 billion euros, just pocket money to spend, they are creating these fantastic simulations. It's like pipes, wild pipes, and roots of trees. But what's inside the roots, nobody knows. You move along, and they have no clue what's inside. Is there water, or is there whiskey flowing in there? Is it boiling? Is it? So we have no clue, and they have no clue. And all of a sudden, it turns out it's only a very mechanical understanding of configuration, but not an understanding of the brain. However, I must say, from my observation, I have the feeling that all these technical things that they did will result in a catalog, in a very vast encyclopedic catalog of, let's say, the pipes and the roots and connections between them that may have great value for other things. And you noticed that very quickly. No, not quickly. Took at least 5 years until you started to look at it differently.
Yes.
And we see it.
Noah, do you want to comment on that?
Yes,
I should confess.
It did take me 5 years. I do agree with you, Werner. I think that the research is not for naught. It's not just going to vanish into thin air. The results of all of this, the work being done, will be useful in only, like, at the very least, that someone else doesn't have to replicate it, that it can be taken and applied to something else. The toiling is always for some end. It doesn't just vanish. But certainly the way I thought it was going to start, as you said, it took me about 5 years to recalibrate and to see it as how you're describing.
What made you not just like stuff it all, like throw it out and think like, oh, I was wrong, this thing is all a ruse, I should stop? What made you think like, oh, that this complication, this showmanship is interesting and tells me something about science? Maybe
I had a moment there in the middle, and maybe 3/4 of the way through, where I wasn't sure what I was doing. Right. I absolutely didn't know what film I was making, and I didn't know why I had become involved in all this. I didn't have a connection really to that 22-year-old person who started making the film. I had grown, through my 20s to not really understand where I was, and I was a little disoriented in what this project was at a certain point. So I was close to that, Molly. Actually, like, I wasn't so far from what you're describing, but It is noble, Noah. It is noble that you continued. There is no half a film. There may be half a loaf of bread, but there's not half a film. So, and it's very noble that you changed course. I do not see anyone around who sets out to make a film, let's say a documentary, and starts changing course. You don't see that, but you did it.
So
well, I mean, what about you,
really
Werner, though?
noble.
I feel like a lot of your documentaries don't go the way it feels like the characters or you at the outset thinks they're going to go. It almost feels like, in a way, you've written the playbook for how some of us might follow an unpredictable narrative.
Well, it is, I have to rearrange that. Well, I never have such clear goals. I dig into life itself. I try to find out what is our humanness, what is the status of the human soul right now. When I go to death row and I have conversations with inmates who will be executed 8 days later, you cannot prepare yourself for anything. You just go in and with your empathy and with your intelligence and with your everything that you have got in you, you just follow the flow, try to find out, try to take a very deep look wherever it leads you, and you adapt to it. And the film should show what you have found.
Wow.
And
A question.
In feature films, I do things. My set all of a sudden is flooded in Agari, the Wrath of God, and I incorporate the flooded set all of a sudden in a little twist in the screenplay that I wrote in 5 minutes. Then, so you adapt.
I love incorporating the wrath of God. That's something I want to remember. We have a question from a listener. Roger asks, do you wish an answer? I think, Noah, we can start with you on this. Do you wish the answer was found, or are you more overwhelmed with the complexity of the brain and in awe to the point that you are happy the answer was in fact not found?
I self-admittedly, I wanted this eureka moment to happen when I started making the film. And I would say that in the past few years in the finishing up the film, I was still hoping they might have a full, like, even mouse simulation, and I could capture this virtual mouse that was being turned on. And I still was kind of yearning for that. I came to terms with being glad that the journey had just happened, and that this interest in the sort of the unpredictability and these sort of tiny mistakes, as I call them in the film, that became the revelation for me. And that has become a very productive thing to have found out about just through making this film. And I'm kind of equally glad now that was sort of the result of all this. But to those ends, there's actually, Werner, something from your last documentary from Fireball that stuck with me that I think is relevant here. That you go into that museum, and for anyone who's seen the film, and there's this sort of simulacrum of a miner who's speaking about the past. And at the very end of the sequence, you say about him, he says, I'm not a prophet, I'm just a miner. And that's sort of how you end it. And that's sort of how I ended up making sense of this project a little bit, I think, of just sort of feeling like I was just mining year after year for something, but not knowing what really, and trying to just get rid of the baggage of trying to be a prophet about the brain or capture a prophet about the brain, like some single truth that we could all, unlock something with. I really feel like life is much more like being a miner than it is a prophet.
That's really beautiful. Werner, do you ever, are you like to take the metaphor, do you think about mining or profiting, being the prophet in your documentary films?
No, you should never try to be a prophet. Yeah. Neither in life nor in your movies nor anywhere. Not even in your church. Just stay away from that one. No, we're trying to dig as deep as it gets.
Yeah.
And we are explorers. We are bound by our vision to explore.
Have you in the ideas of like staying away from prophets? I'll ask another listener question, Noah, is to what extent do you think Henry Markham has delusions of grandeur? So Henry Markham, obviously, for those who haven't seen the film, being the main character in the film.
I try to avoid psychologizing about him. The film can stand for itself. Delusion of grandeur is an actual psychological condition, so I would never want to touch that. I do think people who see the film can make up their own mind about it. I think somebody who in the world of neuroscientists, many of the neuroscientists I would eventually come and talk to felt something like that, and that someone who would stake a claim on 10 years to understand something of such depth and complexity has a certain proximity to grandeur, maybe I'll say, than a delusion of it. But yes, and by the way, I think it's very complex. It's not clear that this project would have taken off or the funding would have been given in the way it was if someone hadn't staked out such a bold claim. So that's something everyone can grapple with a little bit, is it sometimes takes a dreamer or someone who has such grandeur and a hubris about them to a certain extent to captivate people and open wallets. Now that we can discuss the repercussions of that, but that's undeniable.
I love that. I would like to discuss the repercussions of that. Like, Werner, I think you have some thoughts in this world about how the benefits of ego when you're trying to follow a character, when you're trying to decide what stories to tell, at the same time, the way ego can get in the way of the types of stories we decide to tell or how we decide to tell a story.
Well, it doesn't exist for me, this question, and my own ego has to disappear. There's only the project. And the only thing, I always keep saying, the only thing that counts is what you see on the screen at the end.
Yeah.
And whether it was difficult or not doesn't count. Whether I had sleepless nights or not doesn't count.
Yeah.
Whether my ego was shattered, it all does not count. What counts is what you see.
Yeah. Not even yours, but what about your subjects? Like, have you ever either been wooed by a subject?
Sure. I understand. Yeah, that's a different story. That's purely storytelling in the nature of story. And in cinema, you have characters larger than life, and sometimes with very big egos, and very misled, and very tragic, and very hilarious, and very whatever you name it. Of course, you have to live with the characters, and you have to make them visible in their grandeur and in their fallibility, and that's what exactly what Noah is doing. His leading character has a grand design, and it makes him very human that he's so fallible.
Yeah, Noah, there's sort of like and maybe this is something that you being in the film tackles, but I'm just thinking about with the personality of Henry, the fact that you started feeling like he was an unreliable narrator, but you're trying to tell a documentary. So you're trying to capture truth and you're trying to tell science. And so you're trying to capture truth of science. But when you have the unreliable part, when you have the showmanship, that starts to get really blurry. How do you figure out what truth is in the middle of that? Like, is it like true to the science? Is it true to the moment? Is it true to what Henry wanted? Like his version of truth?
Yeah, I think there's different layers of that. On one hand, I had to be true to who I was when I started making the film. When I'm telling the story 10 years later and editing it, I couldn't just decide what I just know now and sort of cultivate that personality because I had put myself in it. I felt I had to be true to my entree into it all. And this is what we've talked about before. I had to lead through my own foibles to arrive at what I see now. But you're also asking about sort of, the objective truths versus subjective truths as it relates to talking about science in a very unknown and unknowable potentially field. For that, I would say the North Star has always been the Herzogian notion of ecstatic truth, which maybe Werner can speak to, because I think there's a truth that emerges not from pure objectivity, because I can't imagine such a thing exists in documentary filmmaking. There is no sort of voice of God or view from nowhere. I really feel like in the end, I'm looking for a poetry in what I'm documenting, and the poetry comes from scientific realities that these people are struggling with, but it also comes from the feeling in the room at the moment you were filming, and it has to be a kind of like mixing of things that are don't have words sometimes. So I think but Werner, I'd be curious your how you respond to this question of, because you've made some, a number of documentaries that deal with science, and also the film Lo and Behold comes to mind too, in dealing with technology and these kind of systems. When people, confront you about the question of objective truth, how do you frame it?
We shouldn't go into it, because we would need at least the next 48 hours hanging out together. So we won't do that, but just a few hints, of course. When Michelangelo, for example, creates a statue, the sculpture of the Pietà, the Virgin Mary holding her son taken from the cross. Now we see the face of Jesus is the face of a 33-year-old man. And when we look at the face of Mary, his mother, the mother is 17, maybe only 15. So my question comes now, did Michelangelo try to give us fake news? Did he try to cheat us, to tell us a lie? No, I think he was after a deeper truth, an ecstasy of truth, where he shows the essence of Jesus and the essence of his mother. And because of that, he started to invent and distort and fabricate, but for the sake of pointing out something much deeper, much more important. And in science, of course, it's always the status quo of the current level of insight. And it will go on, and our insight will be replaced by insight in the future. In the future of the future, we will have more and more, but it's only always a status quo of insight, except maybe mathematics. That's the only thing that I would accept.
Yeah. I love that notion of there's like truth, but then sometimes to actually tell the truth, you have to tell the feeling of the truth. That's more real than the fact itself. And as storytellers, we're constantly deciding what fact is important, but also what fact tells the feeling, or what gesture tells the feeling of the thing.
Yeah, I'd be very careful about the term feeling, even more careful about the term truth. We should not touch it. And if we touch it, only with a pair of pliers. I give you one short example in my feature film that I did recently in Japan, a family romance, where you can rent friends or family members that are absent. After I'd done my film, the Japanese TV asked the man who provides actors and rents them out to play a friend of yours. They aired it. They actually asked him, can you give us one of your clients who has used your services? And they interviewed him as well. And it turns out he was an imposter. He was also an actor. And TV station had to apologize. They didn't do due diligence and all these things. But now it becomes interesting. The man who cheated the network and said, this is a real client of mine who tells you about his solitude. I sent you on purpose an imposter, because a real old man who is solitary would feel embarrassed and would lie, or would tell you only half the truth, and he would kind of lie to save face. But the man I have sent to you, who is a liar, an imposter, he has done this job 224 times, and he knows what's going on. And only from the imposter you will hear the truth, only from the liar. So be careful. Let's not lose ourselves in all this.
That's amazing. Noah, do you have any final thoughts? I mean, I hate to do this, but we're even over now and at the end of our time. But I open the floor to either of you.
No, I mean, I have to thank you, Molly, for hosting and for the wonderful questions. And Werner, thank you so much for watching the film and for being here this evening. It's been wonderful to talk to you about it.
Good luck, Noah. Good luck with your film. Good luck with your audiences, and good luck as a beekeeper. You have started.
I will meet it.
You started. You also started as a beekeeper. Complexity of a body of many creatures that are functioning in a communal way. That's amazing. So, as much luck with your bees, I wish you as with your film.
I'll meet it. I appreciate that. Thank you.
This is wonderful. I want to thank both Noah and Werner for coming tonight. I want to thank the Coolidge for hosting us. I want to thank the film's funders, Sandbox Films and Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and the film's production team, which includes Taylor Hess, Kellen Quinn, Jesse Miller, Greg Bausted, and Jessica Harrop, as well as all the theaters that are participating in the Science on Screen endeavor, where this film will be shown. Go watch In Silico. It'll be maybe in person in theaters, but definitely online tomorrow. And to everyone who watched and sent in questions, thank you. Good night, I think.
All right.
All right.
I
hope, we don't know if we might still be live for all we know, right?
No, they should cut it there. Yeah, no, very good, very good. You should have great success with your film.
Thank you, Werner. And I'm not sure if Greg told you, but you telling me years ago to leave the sound running. I met you that evening at the film forum after you showed White Diamond, and you told me just leave the sound running after the interview. That really was a big piece of advice for me to hear at that moment. So I have to thank you for that.
If possible, also image.
Image, yes, of course, both.
Because sometimes there's an